Right, good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is our live platform where we have a conversation every evening at 8 o'clock on things that are important in this country. Today, we're going to talk about the case of comedian Munawar Faruqui. For those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming there are very few people who don't know the details of this case, but let me go over it once very quickly. He was arrested on the 1st of January in Indore for allegedly hurting religious sentiments during a program. It was alleged that he had made derogatory remarks against Amit Shah, and he had also said something about the Godhra riots. He was arrested during his performance at Munawar Cafe in Indore. The Indore Police, though, has said that there is no visual evidence to show he had made any statements. They don't have a video. But his bail pleas have been rejected twice. He was arrested on sections 153A, promoting enmity between groups on the grounds of religion, 295A, deliberate malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings of any class of the Indian Penal Code. Now, along with Faruqui, a few of his associates were also arrested: Edward Anthony, Prakash Vyas, Priyam Vyas, and Nalin Yadav, some of whom said that they had absolutely nothing to do with the performance. Now, the complaint against Faruqui was filed by Ekalavya Singh Gaur, who is the chief of a group called Hindu Rakshak Sangathan, and a BJP MLA and Malini Gaur's son. So here's the interesting thing, though. There is an article that's on your screen right now, not that Google search window, but the article from Article 14, which is an online magazine, which has spoken to Police Superintendent Vijay Khatri. He has said that Faruqui made no jokes at all. Now, Mr. Khatri, who is the superintendent of police, says the police had oral evidence. The complainants claim that he overheard the rehearsal and that Faruqui was going to make these jokes but hadn't just made them yet. And the policeman has actually praised these groups for being vigilant and active and alert. He also says it doesn't really matter if he hadn't made the jokes because there was hangama at the venue before Faruqui could perform. And the police was told by the complainants that the comedians were rehearsing before the show and they were cracking jokes about Ram and Shivji during the rehearsal. Now, there's a twist in all of this in the fact that the UP police has now requested his custody over a different case, and they have asked to question him in a case of hurting religious sentiments during the program. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to examine this from the point of view of the law. What does the freedom of expression law say in our country? Is it necessary to have video evidence? Is there enough evidence that, based on what this policeman is saying at this point, for Faruqui to be in jail for as long as he has been and to not be granted bail? What does this basically leave us with as far as freedom of speech and expression is concerned? To help us answer these questions, I'm always happy when we have women on the panel. Ms. Geeta Luthra is a senior advocate with the Supreme Court. Ms. Karuna, advocate with the Supreme Court. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening to both of you. Ms. Luthra, if I may please start with a question for you. The comments of the superintendent of police saying that this was an oral complaint made based on what was heard during the rehearsal and what was intended. How does that fit into our law? Can somebody be prosecuted for what they intended to say? Ms. Luthra, you have to unmute your system. I'm sorry.
So there's a whole debate going on in today's age and time, which is in a larger perspective, which is whether there can be pre-censorship. So that's subject of a larger debate. But if you look at the facts of this case, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you look at the facts of this case, there is something that the Delhi High Court had said, which was beautifully written by Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, who's now in the Supreme Court, with regard to Mr. M.F. Hussein's paintings, which seem to have, according to some people, portrayed Hindus' gods and goddesses in his paintings in a very poor light. And the court said that, look, this is an artistic expression, and we cannot be so oversensitive and so over the board and not appreciate something which is done while one is exhibiting art. I can say in this context that even if it was said, you have to see that it's a comedian, a person who is making a parody, and that parody can extend to any of us. I have seen so many shows which will extend to perhaps hurting the sentiments of lawyers, because they are saying lawyers see everybody in the light of a petitioner or a respondent. And, ultimately, they have to exaggerate, they have to joke, they have to. And he's not hurting any religious sentiments, most important. In any case, the more important aspect is we cannot be so oversensitive.
But Ms. Luthra, doesn't the law say that sensitivity is protected by the law?
This sensitivity, of course, is protected by the law. Right of freedom of expression is protected, and it is taking a point to an absurdity. So, of course, what I'm saying is there is a whole debate on the pre-censorship aspect today's day because of people reporting about cases and going in the public domain about matters which are sub judice. So we can't generalize it, but otherwise pre-censorship cannot be permitted in any circumstances. So something that you say that you heard, which may be part of a rehearsal, would amount to an element of pre-censorship and therefore would be impermissible. I was just going to, therefore, not getting into that part of the debate, because that part of a debate can go to other aspects which are not germane to this debate. And this debate is very clear that here is a person who would, if he had said something, would not, it cannot be pre-censored. It is a breach of right of freedom of speech and expression, something which we in this country have always valued and respected and want to uphold those principles. We cannot lower our threshold to what would be abnormal.
And I'll come back to what would be abnormal, because we've seen a series of these sort of enraged sensitivities. But I just want to bring in Ms. Nundy as well. Ms. Nundy, good evening. The question of evidence does arise here, where there are reports of the fact that the police have said in court that there is no video evidence to what was said. In that case, what works? Eyewitnesses who heard him say it, does that count? And the fact that he has been denied bail twice right now, does that add up as well? What sort of evidence is required in a case like this one?
The rule in any case, Faye, is bail, not jail, right? Now, if you look at that and you look at the fact that, as recently as the Arnab Goswami case, what the Supreme Court had said was very specific. It said that it is the duty of the courts across the spectrum, the district judiciary, the high courts, and the Supreme Court, to ensure that the criminal law does not become a weapon for the selective harassment of citizens. And here, it has become a weapon for the selective harassment of this citizen, because the Indore Police has been quite clear that no such thing, no such video exists, for example, right? And that there's no such evidence, but quite apart from anything, it's a speech offense. And where is there any evidence that custodial interrogation is required in this case, right? And for such a long period. So my question is that at the very least, why is this boy not out on bail? And quite apart from that, why is the heckler's veto here being exercised? What is the heckler's veto? The heckler's veto is when the speaker is not protected, like in the Perumal Murugan case. As Ms. Luthra quite correctly pointed out, Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul's judgment, he also made the decision in the Perumal Murugan case when he was Chief Justice of the Madras High Court. Now, Perumal Murugan was a man who wrote about a book of fiction, which people took umbrage to, and the police, instead of protecting him, protected the people who were offended, and kind of sort of just let them run the law. And that's exactly what I see is happening here, where you have somebody who is locally powerful and part of the ruling party, and instead of booking him for assault, what is happening is that once the criminal justice process is initiated, it's then because our courts are overburdened and there are long court dates, once you're in it, it's very difficult to get out. Yes. You see? And so when you see the High Court date, for example, the High Court has given 1 week's date because the case diary was not produced by the...
Forgive me for interrupting you, but what is a case diary that the police need to produce before the court?
Basically, they're sort of contemporaneous notations as to what's been happening in the case, right? Now, the thing is that, yes, one understands that the courts are overburdened, but given what the Supreme Court has recently said, and given just the sort of precepts of the rule of law, one really would wish for the courts to come down hard on protecting civil liberties and individual liberties, as the Allahabad High Court has done a number of times. And with regard to what Ms. Luthra was saying about precensorship, she's absolutely right. There is a constitutional bench judgment by Justice Fazil Ali way back in 1950, saying that precensorship is not allowed. It's not okay. So the fact that now this young man, pursuant to the production warrant from UP, will probably be taken to UP. If he gets his anticipatory bail there, then in any case, he would have to come back to Indore and get bail here. So the whole situation, it's an absolute nightmare. And I don't think we can step away from the fact that the young man is a Muslim. And the fact that Muslims are overrepresented already in our criminal justice system and have been for a while. But in today's era, I think there is absolutely no doubt that it makes you more vulnerable to criminal prosecution for this sort of thing.
So coming to the case from UP, and I'll bring this to Ms. Luthra, the Uttar Pradesh police have obtained a production warrant for Mr. Faruqui again in connection to a case that was lodged against him in April last year. Officials say they have submitted this production warrant at the Indore district jail. This was reported by the Indian Express. It's on your screen. However, authorities in the Indore jail, where Faruqui is currently lodged following his arrest, have not received the warrant yet. So this is a completely different case about a video that was apparently uploaded on the internet, which has since been taken down. But does this mean, Ms. Luthra, that he's perhaps going to be bounced from jail to jail for a while? And then, what is stopping? And I actually genuinely want to ask this question as someone who creates content on the internet. So does this mean that every state government, or in every state there can be a case lodged, and every state can then ask for the individual to be moved from jail to jail?
So that, of course, is for a social media, whatever that he sent out. So it's not for the same thing. But for example, if you take a case of a nature which can sprout, like spreading disaffection among communities, or aspects of sedition, you could actually file cases of the same nature in various courts until the person goes to, say, his high court and says, put them all in one court, or goes to the Supreme Court and says, since they belong to different states. But these are two different cases. So this is a standard thing which the police do if they don't want, or somebody who's inimical to you can do, if they don't want you to go on bail. So they keep the production warrant in limbo, and they wait till you get bail. So the day you are getting bail and you are getting released from the jail, that's the time they take the production warrant, bring it and say, now my state needs him. Now police station at place XYZ needs him. And then you bring another production warrant, say from another state, say Uttarakhand or somewhere else, or even within UP from another state, saying there's another post of this man. So, new cause of action, therefore, we need him. So, the idea is how to keep a person inside for as long as you can. Remember, this offense under 295A is only 3 years imprisonment. For example, take a place like Delhi, and I think there are Supreme Court directions also during this COVID period, that those with 7 years and under, each state should form its own guidelines and try to release people after, in terms of its guidelines, so that the jails don't become overcrowded, because these are not such serious offenses. We are talking of 3 years. 3 years, it's not an offense according to me. It's a case where he would get discharged, he would get quashing, he would get acquittal. But we have to go that way. So for non-production of a case diary, which case diary the police normally have to maintain day to day in order to show what's the nature of investigation. So when a judge is giving bail or refusing bail, the judge says, all right, let me see your case diary, what kind of investigation you've done in the matter, who you have examined, what have those witnesses said, because you can't be keeping a person from 1st January, today you are on 18th, I think. You can't be keeping him. What have you done in these 18 days in such a offense under 295A? So if you want to delay, you don't come with the case diary. You come as the police, as if you've come to watch a show. You don't produce your case diary. Why have you come if you don't come with your case diary? I go to the court to argue a case, I don't go with my file. So the police comes, they come without a case diary. The judge says, okay, produce your case diary. So that's why the matter is probably kept after lunch or in the afternoon. And then wasn't taken up, because clearly at this time the courts are slightly overburdened. But this is a serious kind of case where the police is almost virtually saying that, what I understand, that they didn't seem to have much investigation. So once you have that, you show your case diary, the man goes scot-free because the production warrants haven't reached jail. But if you delay it, then the UP production warrants will reach.
Exactly.
So that he won't be released.
Wow. Is this, so basically, Ms. Luthra, you're saying that there are various now police stations that are just trying to make sure this young man is never released, or
at least one other for the moment.
At least one other that we know of.
That's
and I want to, even if, let's assume, the police do discover the evidence that they're looking for, which right now, let me tell the audience that they don't have. So let's put a pin in the evidence for a second and just look at Article 21, right to personal liberty, which Ms. Nundy also pointed out, that the norm has to be bail and the exception has to be jail. And there are some conditions where, is it likely that this individual will flee the country? Is it likely that this individual will intimidate witnesses or tamper with evidence? Is it likely that the police need custody of this individual in order to interrogate, to access details? Do you see any of these things as possible given this case, Ms. Luthra?
So the first thing here is you have to have a deliberate and malicious intention to outrage the religious feelings of a particular community. So this expression of a deliberate intention, intentional, malicious intention, in the case of a person who is following this as a profession, where do you get that intention? So I don't see anything to my mind. And as Karuna has said, you will not look at the fact that hangama ho gaya, and therefore I will find an excuse and arrest a person. तुम जो हंगामा कर रहे हो उनको अरेस्ट करो. You can't be arresting a person who's completely innocent just because some people are taking law and order into their own hands. Will you arrest those who create a law and order problem or those who are doing a peaceful performance? So we're putting everything on its head. That's all I can understand. And we can't have a police chief justifying it. So the moment that somebody goes to the police chief, see, there can be people locally, constables, sub-inspectors, who are not having perspective, who've lost perspective, or who are over anxious to please. But when it comes to the senior most officer, he has to say, what are you doing?
Well, if we step back and actually look at the larger picture here, just yesterday, there were 2 FIRs filed over this weekend against the makers of the show Tandav for offending the religious sentiments, outraging the religious sentiments of people. Now, the writer, the producer, the director, the head of Amazon has been named, in these FIRs. And we know that the Information Broadcast Ministry has summoned them as well. But I want to understand from you, Ms. Nundy, if you would answer this question. Does the police have the ability, or should the police at this point exercise their their understanding when someone walks into the police station to file an FIR? Or are they required to just file whatever someone? So I could walk in saying that, my sentiments were outraged by, I don't know, anyone. Does the police actually have to look into the matter before they file the FIR, before they go out and start picking up people? How does this work? Because at this rate, we'll just keep filing FIRs and people will keep getting arrested. So where do we draw that line between the process, which is obviously punishment, and our fundamental freedoms?
So first, Karuna,
so when it's a cognizable, So when it's a cognizable offense, the law says, per Lalita Kumari, which is a constitutional bench judgment again, it says that the police has to register an FIR, right? But it's the face of the complaint, the cognizable offense has to be made out. Now, the problem here with the law is this, that both 295A, which is the insult to religious feelings, and 153A, which is sort of sowing enmity between communities, have been read down. Now, what does reading down mean? Reading down means that a constitutional court looks at the offense and says that it can only apply in these very limited circumstances, right? Now, when you have a cognizable offense, it means that the lower level, most junior person can go and arrest unless there are particular limits given within that, within the circumstances of permissible arrest, which were actually, in the case of Section 66A, before it was struck down, an interim order was passed by the Supreme Court saying that, look, it has to be one of the senior most police officers, otherwise you can't register an FIR under that. But that was because there was a challenge and prima facie, the law appeared ridiculous. Ramji Lal Modi says, the Supreme Court decision with regard to 295A says that the deliberate and malicious insult to religion must have a calculated tendency to disrupt public order. What does that mean? It's not just any old insult. It's not even an insult that is deliberate and malicious. It has to be calculated to disrupt public order. What is public order? Public order is not one guy going and heckling someone else. So it's not even one guy going and committing a crime against someone else. Public order is a much larger thing, as judgments like Ramesh Thapar and other judgments make clear. The disruption of public order is something a bit like a riot, right? Now, the problem with our law and our speech law is this, that in retaining a law that is so broad, because how am I supposed to know how many religions there are and what might be considered insult? You know, in one temple, in UP, for example, you putting meat in the temple would be considered extremely an extreme criminal activity, whereas in Kurg, it's offered to the god, right? Now, how many religions am I supposed to keep track of as somebody who speaks at all? So, given the circumstances, I think the fact that it exists on the books is a travesty. One, two, the fact that it's been read down in this manner, and that a local constable is supposed to know what the Supreme Court judgment says, is completely unrealistic. And we don't even have it, you know, you may have it in a little explanation in some of the versions of the IPC publications, but you don't have them in all. So frankly, the way that our current structure is a problem. And that in itself, I think, is hugely chilling of speech. Quite apart from what you were saying, Faye, is that has this fellow who went and harassed the comedian, has he demonstrated any of this? Has he even averred any of this in his FIR? I think the fact that this young man is still in jail, has not been given bail, and these long dates are being given is a real problem.
So that was going to be my next question. I do realize that I have about 5 minutes with the both of you, so I'll be quick. Ms. Luthra, do you believe that Munawar Faruqui is being unfairly at this point treated? Is this malicious? Does this qualify as malicious prosecution?
So malicious prosecution is very difficult because basically, first you show that the case is false, then you show that the case is investigation, then you file a closure, and then you have to do a case of malicious prosecution. So you may be right in malicious prosecution, but you will be proving it till the cows come home. So the fact is, yes, it's there. Now, just to add to what Karuna said, is that Lalita Kumari may say that if a person comes alleging a cognizable offense, an FIR would need to be registered by his just saying that FIR needs to be registered, despite being read down and despite the fact that the judgment of Ramji Lal, which she referred to, Modi, says aggravated forms of where you insult religious feelings in an aggravated form. So that was the attempt of reading it down. So obviously that this doesn't qualify. Assume an FIR is registered. The power to arrest does not mean the right to arrest. So there are two differences. I just wanted to add to what she said. Joginder Kumar and many other judgments say, D.K. Modi, that you may have a power to arrest. Does it mean will you arrest? So you may have the power, but you won't exercise. You may, in terms of Lalita Kumari, in a case of this nature, I don't think the ingredients even satisfy cognizable offense.
Correct.
But if they do, you would not arrest at least. You may register, but you will not arrest. So that is what I wanted to say.
Well, Ms. Nundy, here's the question. Given the series of these sort of cases that have been filed, including contempt of court on Kunal Kamra, on the young woman who does the sanitary panels, plus various OTT platforms getting FIRs filed against them, is this perhaps an attempt to instill a sense of fear and self-censorship? Because people will start saying, hey, you know what, let's not make any jokes. Let's not write anything. Let's just, stay in sort of neutral territory. And we know that there is this demand for neutral territory now. Write things that are not prickly, make jokes that don't upset anybody. Sort of, talk about the weather. Let's not get prickly.
Wait, one second.
Okay.
Do you remember the comedian case of Bombay where several years ago.
Kikku
for
Sharda. This
caricature.
is exactly what I was just going to
Let
talk
us
about.
say,
But why
please,
don't you? No, why
please
don't you
go
say and
ahead.
I'll add?
No, please go on.
So the same thing occurred to us, right? Because this was a particularly egregious case, but the pattern is replicating itself across the country. So as Ms. Luthra was saying, there was a comedian called Kikku Sharda on comedy nights with Kapil, right? And the jurisdictional problem that you were talking about is there in full blast here. The Haryana police, FIR is registered because he said things about Gurmeet Ram Rahim. Now, keep in mind that Gurmeet Ram Rahim was subsequently not only convicted of rape, but also the killing of a journalist.
Yes.
Okay. At the time, however, there was a lot of institutional sympathy for this so-called God man. And this man, contrary to no notice was given under 41A, there he was picked up, which is required per Anish Das, etc. He's picked up off the streets of Mumbai and essentially kidnapped by the Haryana police, taken back to Haryana. He then apologizes, he gets scared, he apologizes, and he gets bail. He's on his way back to Delhi, and then another police station in Haryana, they come and they intercept his car and they arrest him again. You see? So the problem with this kind of multiple jurisdiction issue, where you don't have to prove any particular harm, you see? And I think this, Ms. Luthra, I think is a really important thing for the courts now to do, which is that if you're a complainant, you can't just appropriate the entire Hindu religion and say that, look, the Hindu religion is mine, I happen to be Hindu, so I am saying you offended this god and goddess. You have to demonstrate that you have suffered some harm, that at the very least. Otherwise, how are you coming as a heckler, as somebody who decides he has some power, and going and interfering with somebody's right of free speech? You know? So I think that really, when you're speaking of the chilling effect, I think there is an attempt to appropriate religion, and a very successful attempt. I think there is an attempt to use it to silence everybody who says anything against a particular political party, and pretending that it's actually about the religion. It's an attempt to silence particular communities. It's an attempt at hegemony, and I think that is a real problem.
So let me present you with a counter argument. And I have met people who have said to me that, you know what, these entertainers, these OTT platforms that are making shows right now, the film industry, the comedians would never joke about any other religion, but they take Hinduism really lightly because we're easygoing and enough is enough. And now we have to draw a line in the sand, and this is that line in the sand to get them to fear, whether it is through fear or through anything else, stop doing this. We cannot be the subject of your material, whether that is your show or your joke, and this is the way to do it. What is your response to that, Ms. Luthra?
So I think that if you're a majority, I mean, firstly, I think it's true across board. Nobody can be so oversensitive. The second is, if you're a majority, you can take that much little more and be slightly more resilient. Ultimately, freedom of speech and expression has to be on a pedestal as long as you are not defaming anyone or bad mouthing anyone to an extent that it is harming him or her. The fact is, it has to be on a pedestal, and we cannot have any chilling effect on it. Otherwise, we will lose a democracy. I want to go so far as to say that.
But why do you believe that? Do you believe that if people start sort of the chilling effect that Ms. Nundy mentioned, that we start self-censoring, saying, hey, let's not say this, let's not tweet it, let's not joke about it, let's not write it in our shows, let's not write it in our films, let's not do panel discussions about this topic, because you know what? I don't want to be picked up from the streets of Mumbai tomorrow, taken to Haryana or taken to Uttar Pradesh, as the case may be. Do you believe that that is dangerous to democracy?
I think that if people cannot have a sense of humor, if people cannot take criticism, then we are creating a very unhealthy society. So this, and my most famous, favorite philosopher is John Stuart Mill, who said if 99 people say one thing and one person says another, then that person could be right. And history has taught us, legal precedents have taught us that very often the minority view becomes what becomes more acceptable and more far more enlightened. So we learn with every different view. I think criticism is very healthy and we should know how to take it.
All right. Said very well, actually, from a lawyer and a woman. Remember, lawyer jokes are legendary. We've been telling them from the time we were children. Everybody tells lawyer jokes about how, oh, about how shark-like lawyers are. And this is something that lawyers have taken on their chin for generations. But at the end of the day, this is about protecting freedom of speech, is about protecting democracy. And there are several problems here, as have been very clearly listed out by both the ladies on the panel. The various police stations coming into action, the idea of picking somebody up as soon as he gets bail, if he does get bail, and taking him somewhere else, and just process being punishment in our country. That at the end of the day, at the end of his trial, it may be possible that there's no evidence against him, but till he gets to that point, the process itself is extremely unpleasant. Thank you so much, both of you, for answering my questions here this evening and spending time with us on this panel, helping us understand it a little better. To my audience, thank you for joining us. At exactly 9 o'clock, we'll be back with Richa Chadda. We'll talk about the threats that she has received about her new film poster. We'll talk about representation of the Dalit community in films, whether there are enough writers, whether we're sensitive enough, whether we're properly represented, and where all of that should ideally be leading. That's at 9 o'clock. So join us at 9 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.